Welcome to the Cherish and Conquer Podcast, the show dedicated to celebrating female entrepreneurs' strength, resilience, and innovation. Be inspired by stories of women and what they cherish to help them conquer against all odds. Every other week, you will learn from remarkable women on how they navigate challenges, uphold their values, and create sustainable success. And now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Hey, welcome to the Cherish and Conquer Podcast. I have Juliana Marulanda. That's a tongue twister for me. I'm trying to get it right. But also, we're going to be talking about sometimes what can be a tongue twister. And when I think about being able to put ourselves into the right position for success, that changes throughout the life cycle of our organization. Going from solo entrepreneur to adding people to actually going into a growth phase where you want to scale. That's what Juliana is going to give us some insight into, and really a framework to help us to be able to do that. So Juliana, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So Juliana, before we actually start going into some of that and really getting an understanding of why you do what you do and where it came from, can you tell everyone a little bit about or the difference that you make in people's lives?
Absolutely. So I have been doing business operations for the last 20 years, 20 plus years, which is fantastic. And I have been working with, digital operations, for a long time. And when I say for a long time, I was training sales teams on WebEx beta. I don't know if anyone remembers WebEx, but it was like, the grandfather of Zoom. And so technology has always been very dear to my heart, and how we manage individuals and processes of business to become more profitable has really become my mission right now, because I truly believe that no matter your circumstances, right, you can succeed as long as you really sort of take advantage of the resources that are out there, and so that's really, what Scale Time is all about. And Scale Time, my business, we really help you scale your time so that you can have high performance teams, high performance operations, and become really profitable as you're growing.
Well, and as you say that, it's almost a situation of, kind of understanding and helping to solidify the place in which you are right now. So you kind of have to know where you are to know what is required and the resources and the tools that are necessary to help you go where you want to go. Absolutely,
because whatever is going to get you kind of like past $1 million. I always talk about there's this like funky 1.3 million plateau, right? And people always think like, oh, people got to get stuck at $1 million. It's not $1 million. It's like 1.3. And I laugh at this because like whenever I have a sales call, they're like, I'm like, I can't push back, like 1.2, 1.3. And it's because whatever gets you to $1 million isn't going to get you to 3, isn't going to get you to 10. Right. And so there's just different things that need to be put in place. And as a leader of the organization, there's different, basically resources that you need to provide your team to get to that next level.
Well, I would dare to say that with a lot of the changes that we've had with artificial intelligence, that kind of has changed as well in regards to the things that your team needs in order to be able to scale. I mean, how have you seen specifically that change in regards to, what artificial intelligence is or is not enabling?
I think artificial intelligence is enabling production, right? And I think so. I think artificial intelligence is fantastic, right? Like I've always been very, first adopter technology, and I love tech, right? And AI is really just, a part of technology, right? It's a new frontier of technology where technology intersects with data. And I think what's really fascinating is that the use of AI is phenomenal if you know how to use it, right? Like, I don't believe that AI is replacing, all humans or all work. It is the future of work. I think we need to learn how to use and leverage AI. And one of the best examples that I give to people is sort of, and I think AI is fantastic for operationals, and I'll get into specific use cases if you want me to in just a second, but it's like the PC. I think AI is like the greatest thing that came to operations since the PC, right? And it's not like the personal computer, completely replaced everything. It just made everything so much more efficient and better and easier. But you need to learn how to use the computer, right? And it's the same thing with AI. It's not necessarily going to completely, replace everything, but we need to learn how to use it. Now, as far as, I think in operations, because that's sort of my main field, we love it for anyone who's doing any sort of documentation. Documentation is like the brunt of for most people, it feels like a root canal, right? Like, SOPs and, and like now we have to do training, but I don't have time to train because I just need people to do the work, but why does their work suck? So like I think AI is fantastic to be able to do a quick video using whatever tool you've got, take the transcript, put it into your favorite AI tool, and ask it to like spit out an SOP. Now, it's not going to be perfect. And someone still has to review it. And that's the thing. I believe AI is really part of your workflow. Usually it's not your entire workflow. Right, so it's like knowing where you can insert it to make things way more efficient is huge. Like with SOPs, we've seen people, be able to spit out like 5 times more SOPs in the same amount of time than they were able to before. I had a client recently that in 2 weeks created 84 SOPs to train his like staff that he had like new team members coming on. That's huge. Right? Like where before you're like, oh no, this task is going to take me like 3 months, right? Like it's this whole endeavor. But as you start to think of like, okay, what parts of the workflow, it's really great for customer data. If we used it recently we had unstructured data, right? So basically people were filling out like sales forms. So before you get on a sales call, you fill out stuff like what's going on. And we had like thousands of forms that were filled out over the last couple of years. And I wanted to just create a pick list. I was like, you know what? Like we just need to get the top themes, the top things. Like, so that way people just really can kind of do this quickly. Like, how do we make this more efficient? And how do we make our customers feel seen? Like we know what their problems are. Like they just need to pick it and move on. And we put it in ChatGPT and it took it 2 seconds to figure out what the top themes are. So those are the types of abilities where, again, it makes production, it makes customer insights a lot more efficient, but it doesn't necessarily replace people.
And that's a good case example. And so at Myrna, I mean, we even in Myrna's Army in the community, we help people with being able to understand that when you start thinking about the positions and the people on the bus that you have, AI can actually represent many of those seats. So, for example, don't have an HR person or your HR person needs to expand their skills. You can actually create a personality type of HR communication bot. And it doesn't take a whole lot of engineering skills and capabilities, but it's just really knowing, like you were saying, how to use the AI and say, okay, you are an HR manager of an organization of this particular size, and you actually build that very very specialized prompt, and it'll help you with being able to do feedback mechanisms. It will help you with, being able to, put together performance plans, all of those types of things. But like you said, it's how do you do it? And so when I start thinking about this, the workflow and the framework and all that for scaling, help us understand that a little bit.
Want more insights from female entrepreneurs? Get complimentary access to Marina's Army for additional tips, tools, and tactics from this episode. Just go to mirina.ai and click Community for access. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah, so our framework that, I've come up with really for scaling, and I think this is so important for businesses that are under, that are like 0 to 8 figures, right? I mean, I think at 8 figures, it still works, but we got a little bit more to do there. And, and I think this is great. Like, if you're thinking, okay, I'm breaking the million, or I'm breaking kind of like that 8-figure mark, right? So kind of if you're there, our scale framework is SCALE for scaling. The S is seeing what's happening. The C is creating a baseline. The A is amplifying how we do things. The L is lead and delegate, and the E is exit and oversee, right? And we start with see what's happening because so often there's a lack of visibility, right? If you're a solopreneur, you're kind of doing everything and, you're like, oh man, what did that client say? And I have to go back and review my notes. If I took notes, where were those notes, right? Like the organization, where am I putting stuff? Everything's all over the place. If you, have a small team, it's like, okay, now we're managing them. Like, what are they doing? Like, do I have stuff on a whiteboard? Can they see it? Can I see what they're doing? Am I asking, hey, where's your work? Right. So really seeing what's happening, I think that visibility is so important. And, if you're running a team of like 45 people and you're, and all of a sudden, now you have managers and you've got people who are doing production and maybe you've got account managers, right? And you're like, and you're too far away from it, and things start to go down or things are growing really quickly, right? It's because you got both sides of the coin, right? Usually we don't really care if things are just kind of sailing. Oh, okay, things are sailing, that's okay. Right? You're like, eh. But if there's a downturn or an upturn, you're like, I need to see what's happening because we either want to multiply the good, or pour more gas on the fire. Or, there's a bunch of smoke and we're putting out fires. And now we're like, okay, we need to figure out what's going and what's wrong. But you might be too far removed. So in any of these stages, we need to see what's happening. And I think that's huge. And then creating a baseline, because we need to know how we're doing and also how are we stacking up with our competitors, right? Who is... where are we stacking up against the industry? And so that we know how to move the needle. And I think creating a baseline is very important for that. Then amplifying how we're doing things. And like I said, right? When we amplify as we're trying to get to 1 million versus when we're trying to get to 3 million or 8 million, it's going to look a little bit different. One, your resources have changed. Right. So you're not going to invest in the same things that you would invest in when you're trying to get to 8 million that you would when you're trying to get 1 million, because it doesn't make any sense. Right. I'm a huge believer that cash is queen. And so we need to make sure that we're honoring our cash, and we're not making decisions that, sound sustainable, but are going to strap us. So that's really important. And again, right, amplifying how we do it is are we inviting new tools? Are we inviting things that are making us more profitable? Are we using AI in certain parts of our workflow? I think that's important, right? Are our people performing? That's a huge one. I have so many clients, that are just so nice, and that niceness kills our profitability sometimes. Because you have people who are underperforming, and it's not even I'm gonna age myself, like Office Space, like just get rid of them. Right. But it's the idea of like, okay, do we have any corrective action? Are we giving consistent feedback? Like, what does the feedback cycle look like? So that we make sure that people are doing their jobs and they're doing it well, so that as the owner, you're not playing cleanup all the time. So I think that's really important. Then we're going into leading and delegating. And leading and delegating, sometimes I think it's delegating before leading. I really do, because when you first start taking stuff off your plate, it's usually production. And at the beginning, it's not like you can afford, or maybe you can. If you can, that's awesome, right? Like people who are just like know how to do their job perfectly, right? Like at the beginning, it's like, okay, I need to get stuff to like an assistant or VA, or I need to get stuff, to kind of like take these certain things off my plate. And so we need to delegate, not abdicate, which means that we need to make sure that we're training. And even if people know exactly what they're doing, they may not know exactly how you like things done. So making sure that you're training them on your ways of doing and your processes and your special secret sauce is really important. So I think that delegate piece is really is one that often gets overlooked in terms of like high performance delegation. There's a lot of things like just take these things off your plate. Great, but then the quality goes down and you're like, people suck. I can't find good people, right? Like we have to train them. So, taking the time to do that is really important. Then as your organization gets bigger, making sure that you're leading and that your managers are leading is really important, because we want them to be able to make value and data-based decisions in the organization that are going to move the needle towards whatever vision you have. And the last piece is exit and oversee. And I like to add the oversee because, again, that visibility piece is so important. Like I'd love to just kind of set it and forget it. But that usually doesn't happen. We need like dashboards and systems, and scorecards for performance and visibility, right? And exiting can look like, okay, I want to exit nights and weekends so I can spend time with my family and my kids. It can look like I want to be able to exit for 2 weeks off the grid. Like I want to be able to take a vacation and not take my laptop with me, like, and be present and not feel guilty. I think that there's this feeling, I'm going to say something, especially for women, and I've seen this mostly in women, men too, but I think women are more expressive about sort of the guilt that they feel when they're either at work and not with their kids or their family, or when they're at, with their family and then, they're not taking care of their team and their business. And so it's like eradicating that guilt, and if we want to get deeper, that shame, and just be able to be present is huge. So like exiting for 2 weeks and just being present, I think is really big. Hell, exiting for 4 days and being really present is really big. But I like that sort of 2 week milestone, because it solidifies that your business can run without you for at least 2 weeks. And I think that's a big one. And then if your business can run without you for a month, that's huge. And if you're ever thinking about selling your business, right? Like that's one of the things that brokers will look for is, can you be out for a month? Right? Can the business run without you for a month? And then can the business grow without you for a month? That's even bigger, right? Because that means that you've got your sales and marketing machine set, and those engines are set to go. And then there's valuation, right? Like, do you want to exit the business to either, if you're in a place of retirement, maybe like, okay, you want cash, you want this as a cash asset, or you want to start something else, either a new business, a nonprofit, another project. You want your business to give you cash because you've put your sweat, blood, and tears into it, and now you want, to get some ROI off of that, or if you want to sell, right? And so what does that valuation look like? And when you're scaling, if you're going through all of these steps, you're setting yourself up for success in that last piece, no matter how you want to exit.
You hit so many, as you were talking, I just started seeing almost life cycle types of journeys and events in regards to, solo to exit and it being a multi-million-dollar scenario. And I think you hit so many things in regards to, guilt, shame, being able to, even like you were mentioning, put in the extra work to prepare others to be able to take on the responsibilities from like an SOP perspective. And there's just a lot to unpack there. And maybe it would be helpful if we can kind of get an understanding of, what inspired you to start your own business and how does it align with Cherish and Conquer?
Yeah, I've been, I started off on Wall Street, right? And I was looking at financial modeling 16 hours a day. Wasn't my favorite thing in the world. But I really learned, how important profitability and cash were, right? But we were looking at huge, companies. And so, but what was interesting, I also got to see companies. I was in the solar and auto industry, right? So one industry was going up, one industry was going down. And it was fascinating because it's like, oh, okay, this is what it looks like when an industry, is starting to grow. What are the growth factors? And this is what it looks like when, something's declining. And what are those factors? And, this was even like before Tesla. And I think Toyota had just come up with a hybrid truck. And it was like, people were raging. They're like, oh my God, this is anti-American hybrid, blah, blah, blah. Like it was insane. It was a great learning experience. But I was like, I don't want to do this. So I left and I ended up working for this huge conglomerate doing sports and entertainment venues as like a traveling operations manager, if you can even think about that. Because they would like pick me up and put me in a different event every 4 to 6 weeks. And the events were like Super Bowl, USTA tennis, golf, right? So we're talking big events because, I always have a lot of energy and I'm like, okay, I went from one chaotic place to the other. And so it was fascinating because at the time, I was like 23-year-old and I didn't know what I was doing. I basically hacked my way into this job and right, like and so like the gig was, you had to like basically interview about 100 people a day, right? And they're like, all right, Juliana, you're going to get your team of like 50 to 70 people. And I had never managed before, right? Like, I did not know what I was doing. Right? Like that's the honest truth. Like I was 23. I was in a total management role. I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I will figure this out. And they're like, okay, you're going to get your team of 50 to 70. And then you're going to train them across resources that were like, arena long, right? So we're talking about like mile long resources, right? Or depending where you are in the world, like 3 kilometers, right? Like you're dealing with that. And it's like these disparate resources with this brand new team, right? And I get there and I've always looked very young. So I look like I was 13 managing people who were like 2-3 times my age. So I get there and they're like, okay, who's the manager? And I'm like, me. And now go. And the goal is like, you had to hit targets of about $1 million a week, depending on where you were at. And we're doing this for about 9 months, rinse, wash, repeat. And I was like, okay, what do I know? And I was like, I know systems, and I know numbers, right? And I was like, okay, here's like these two things, right? Like I'm going to lean on my strengths. And so really, like, I use systems and numbers to basically like fill in all of my management gaps, right? And I was able to do that pretty effectively, because I kept getting promoted to like more cooler events, right? And so like and to do that, I was like, okay, how can I use systems and numbers to make this work for me? And so I was like, okay, I need to basically hire better, train faster, so I can manage less. Because that was my goal, manage less, because I didn't know how to manage, right? So I was like, hire better, train faster, manage less. And that really worked. And nowadays, like most of the clients that come to me, they're owners, and they're like, Juliana, I don't want to manage, right? Because they're either really great salespeople and they know how to sell, or they're really good craftsmen and they know, or craftswomen, craftspeople, right? Like, and they know how to like do their job, right? Or their output, their deliverables, like their product, their service really, really well. And they excel at it, right? But the management piece, I maybe like 2% of the people who I get are like, yeah, I really want to, sit down and have difficult conversations with people all day and make sure that they're doing their jobs at the most excellent place, and that, we have the best, culture in the world. Now, they have desires of having a great culture. They have desires of having a great team, but doing it, right, and managing the humans, not so much, right? And so that's really where, along the journey, when I got to a place where I was like, okay, I want to start my own business. And I was like, well, what can I do? Right. Cause you're like, it's like, I want to start my own business. Sometimes you're like, I want to do this. Oh, I should start my own business. But really I was like, I want to not work for anyone anymore. Right. Like I kind of proclaimed corporate dropout. So like, what do I do? And I'm like, okay, well, operations is the thing that I really know. From all sorts of things. Like I once worked with an organic toy company. So, with warehousing and sales, like distribution. So I'm like, I know operations, right? Like I know how to make things more efficient, faster and better. So let me do this for small businesses. But at the time, it was like, do small businesses need operations? Because there wasn't a lot of operations consultants out there. It was sort of like management consultants who had graduated, from, McKinsey or BA, and like they just wanted to go out on their own. But like no one really wanted to work with small businesses. And I was like, well, really what I do is process management operations. And it's like, like that was really cringy. Like no one really wanted to hear that at the time. I think now people like are going for that, and they're like, oh yeah, we have to operate better. But, that wasn't the case. So I was like, okay, how to make this sexy? Like people want to scale, right? And they want to scale their time. So scale time. And that was the business. And I really wanted to work on digital operations because pre-pandemic, right, when I started the business, my thought was the way teams were working were being a lot more different. It was like, oh, we have teams, that are near sourcing or outsourcing, flex teams, we've got part-time people and strategic partnerships, and we have, freelancers and contractors and subcontractors and white labeling and co-labeling. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating, right? Like organizations and small businesses are so fragmented, but how do we make sure that we still can deliver on time every time? And that's really why I wanted to focus on the digital operations of things, because like I saw that as the future of work.
So digital for you, I mean, give us an understanding of what the scope of digital means to you.
Yeah, for sure. So digital for me is like, how are we managing our projects and our deliverables, right? Like, what is your project management? How do we make sure that no matter what you're doing, right? Like we can, like things are getting checked off. It's being done to completion, right? Because most of us are working on our computers nowadays. I would say there's still a percentage that is not, but most of us, our work, right? Our work product is digital, right? It's documents and spreadsheets and, artwork, right? So it starts in a digital format, even if it ends up in a, physical format. So how do we manage that? And how do we manage that across teams? When you get a new client, right, how are you onboarding them, right? You've got to send out emails and calendar invites and, potentially like strategic documents. Like what's the flow of that? How do you know that you have all of the information or that your team has all of the information to make sure that whatever your deliverables are, right, whether that's a service, or whether that's a product, so that like they're getting what they need, right? And I worked with, mostly B2B services companies. So we're usually working with deliverables that are digital, right? It's like, okay, you're getting a report, you're getting a website, you're getting a, an ad campaign, you're getting, right? So all of these pieces, right? And if you're working with different teams, especially after the pandemic and with a lot of teams in small businesses being remote, right? You're not walking over to someone's desk and being like, hey, by the way, what's that thing going, right? So how do we make Slack effective and not like a total nuisance that we want to just like kill, right? Like, how do we make sure that if you're an owner or if you're a manager of an organization, that you're able to review work effectively, and that people are being trained as opposed to just getting ringed, dinged, and pinged all day long, right? People repeating the same thing over and over again, asking you the same questions. So like that's all of like the digital operations that are happening to make sure that like things are, being delivered on time, up to the quality and standards that you really want.
Okay, so I'd love to know, what are some of the key lessons that you have learned about having your own business in regards to self-love and its impact on your journey as an entrepreneur? Because you kind of hit on some things that I think are quite interesting in regards to your energy level. You were referring to that, and you talked about guilt and shame. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I think one of the biggest, I would say there's two lessons, right? And this is one that I have to remind myself sometimes when there's a down month. You are not your revenue. And it's, and I have like, we have QuickBooks and like, obviously, given my background, like we're very metrics focused and we're very financially focused, right? And it's like, here's the pipeline, here's this and here's that. But, and I've got like a whiteboard with like my monthly revenue so that like I have it like very, front and center. And when a down month comes, it's like my husband can almost feel it. He's just like, it's like, how are sales? How's everything? And like, cause I get cranky. I get super cranky and I'm like, and I have to remember, like, I am not my revenue, right? And my very quirky sort of reframe that I put in my head is like, and it has to be this quirky just to kind of have that pattern interrupt, is, in a zombie apocalypse, no one will care what your business or your revenue is, right? Like, I kind of go back to like, in a zombie apocalypse, like, who am I, right? Like, I'm like, I have to stay healthy. I have to, be resourceful. Like, like, what are my strengths in a zombie apocalypse so that like I can kind of self-identify and come back to center of like who I am, because I am not my revenue. So I think that's a really big one because, it goes into, right, like making sure that we don't go into scarcity and we're not making business decisions out of scarcity, and it's not affecting our family, and that our mood isn't changing, that it's not affecting our team, So I think that's a really big one, because as an entrepreneur, and, and this is with clients all the time, like, and I tell them too, right? Like there's up cycles and down cycles, there's great months and bad months and worse months. There's macro factors and micro factors. And so, as we have to stay centered. And I think that's really important.
I think you've actually created a new framework, which is the zombie apocalypse mindset reset.
I know, yeah, it's like zombie. It's like, who are you? It is zombie apocalypse. Like, who are you? It's like, I will not get eaten. So I think that was really important. And I think the other one is that, like, fear is irrelevant. And the reason why I say fear is irrelevant is because we are going to have fear, right? And fear will come up in the dumbest ways. Like, it really will come up. It is, and our nervous system will get so impacted, right? Like our nervous system, our cortisol levels, like everything will get so impacted, pressing the send button, right? It's like your nervous system will be basically the equivalent of being next to, like watching a tiger as you're trying to press send. And I think that, like, knowing that most of us, right, like the risk is not that high. Like, I think most people listening to this podcast, are like, don't have someone like on a surgical table, like bleeding out, right? So, like that's a huge risk. Or, I don't know if there's like any money management, like, or any like money fund managers like listening, right? Like that's like, oh man, I could like lose millions of dollars, like, with the press of a button. That I can get, right? Like that I totally understand. But for most of us, it's like, you're like, oh, I'm replying to this person. How do I reply, right? Or someone wants to cancel an account. Can I turn it around? Or, like, is this over? Like, what percentage of like my revenue is this? Or, the first time you do anything, like, the first time you send out a newsletter. Like, I remember the first newsletter, or like the first couple of times I sent out a newsletter. Like, I remember pressing send, and it was like my entire body was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to press send, to the 20 people that were on my mailing list. I was like, it's not that big of a deal. And so it's, and all of these are rites of passage, right? Like, and you're either going to, and the reason why I like the fear is irrelevant is because, if you do it, you're going to be scared anyway, right? If you don't do it, you're going to be scared anyway. So you might as well just do it, because your actual state of like being isn't going to change.
That's great advice. Okay, so what other advice would you give when it comes to business relationships and networking, and how has that impacted you?
Networking is a funny thing. Networking. I would say if you're starting to network, learn the mechanics of networking. And what I mean by that is, in networking, there's actual mechanics, right? And it doesn't matter if you're extroverted or introverted or your personality type or blah, 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 right? It's like, okay. And as a woman too, I think this is, we could go into like socialization and and all this other stuff, right? But I think that it's important to just get the mechanics down, right? So like, okay, if I'm in-person networking, like, like, what do I, what kind of room am I going into? Like, who's going to be there? What kind of relationships do I want from this event? Am I looking for partners? Am I looking for resources? Resources meaning like, if you need to hire like a graphic designer, right? Like, is that going to be on the top of your mind? Am I looking for clients, right? So like, like that type of stuff. Like, what is my pitch? Right? And have different forms of your pitch, meaning like a conversational pitch where you're kind of like sliding your pitch in there, or if you're like at a round table and people ask you for your pitch, right? Like, what is a compelling pitch where you can drop in some like true, like kind of case study knowledge in under a minute, right? Like, get the mechanics down. How do you enter into a group of people? Like this one always is like hard, right? It's like you see like 4 people like conversing and everyone looks cool, and then you're like, oh, they're already in conversation. Like, how do I interrupt the cycle, right? And make it feel like natural, right? It's networking. No one cares. Everyone expects you to interrupt. So just do it, right? Again, fear is irrelevant. You're either going to stand there by yourself, or you're going to do it and you're going to mess up and you're going to get over it, or you're going to do great. Doesn't matter. It's going to be fine. And then how do you exit a cycle, right? Like, how do you excuse yourself to go to the bathroom, to go get a drink, right? Like once a conversation has gone too long, or it gets weird, because as a woman, things usually get a little weirder than it does for men, right? Like even in networking events, it's just like, I could tell stories for days, right? So just how do you know how to exit a conversation gracefully, right? So the mechanics, I think, when you're starting to network are really important. The follow-up of networking is extremely important no matter how skilled you are, because you're coming home with, either business cards, whether they're physical or digital, right? Or if you're in a digital event, right, you're coming, you're taking notes of like, okay, who do I want to speak to, right? And again, I like doing these 3 things. You're a resource of some kind, right? Like a resource could be employee resource, a PR resource, a media resource, like whatever, right? Like resource, a partner, or a client, potential client, right? A lead. So like mark those down, because I think that will help you like then go ahead and prioritize depending on what your needs are afterwards. And the follow-up is so important. 80% of networking is all follow-up. You've made a great impression, but now like, what are you going to do with that? So I think that's really important. And then I think the last piece is like, how are you cultivating relationships that are really valuable from networking, right? And what I mean by really valuable is, all right, like there's networking where it's like volume networking, right? You're like, all right, I need clients, I need this, I need blah, 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 right? Like, and you're out there and you're, and you're hustling totally, right? And then when you start to, like grow as an entrepreneur and you start cultivating your inner circle and you start cultivating like your circle of influence, it's like, who is value aligned, right? Who do you really enjoy talking to? Like, what are those entrepreneurs that you want to cultivate actual relationships with? And I think that's really important as you're networking. Some of my best friends have come from networking. And I think, not everyone is gonna, be that. Most people are not, but I think that, once you pass the volume game, you can start really thinking about, all right, who's in my inner circle that I truly, that we have the same values that I value and that values me.
Enjoying the show? After joining Marina's Army, subscribe and share the Cherish and Conquer podcast on your favorite platform. Thank you. Now, back to the show.
Okay, Juliana, great insight and information, but now we're ready for our Breakthrough Blitz speed round. Are you ready to help us break through?
Let's do it.
All right. So what's your favorite productivity tool or app?
I have 2. Can I give 2? Whimsical for flow charting, diagramming, and sort of anything that is digitally drawn. It's like it's really great for flow charts and or wireframes, stuff like that. Whimsical. It's very fast. I love it. And then the other one is Zeit. It used to be called Cloud App. It got bought, and it lets you like record, capture, screen share. It's kind of everything, annotate. So it's really good for digital editing.
Okay, so what's your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
Cuddles with the puppy. Puppy cuddles, I think, is my favorite way to unwind.
Okay. If you could have dinner with any female business leader, living or deceased, who would it be?
Any business leader. Let's think about this. Sarah Blakely, hands down.
Awesome. What's your favorite quote or mantra that keeps you motivated?
I would say fear is irrelevant. That one keeps it there for me every day.
Alrighty. So what piece of advice would you give to an aspiring female entrepreneur?
Start. Just start. I would say progress over perfection, and just go for it.
Okay, so this is my last Breakthrough Blitz question. What's the biggest misconception people have about being a female entrepreneur, and how do you address it in your own experience?
The biggest misconception. That's a loaded one. To be last. I would say that your voice as a female entrepreneur is something that people have already heard, or that should sound like something, right? I think as a female entrepreneur, your voice is your own, and you get to create what you want with that voice, right? So, and that voice will shine in your writing, it will shine in your marketing, it will shine, right? So if you're not the female entrepreneur that likes pink and maroon, don't do it, right? So, I think that, there's an expectation, maybe not a misconception, but an expectation of what a female entrepreneur is supposed to look and sound like. And I think that if you're listening to this, you don't have to fulfill anyone's expectations.
Juliana, it's been fun. I mean, some of the things that you were able to share from, just a process and business perspective, and also getting, underneath all of that and talking about the humanity aspects has been priceless. I appreciate that. How does the Cherish and Conquer podcast listeners get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So I would say, as part of our scale framework, if you're starting, or if you are in it, and you're in it to win it, right? Absolutely go to scaletime.co, and, contact me directly, email us, check out our resources. I think growing an organization is hard. It's hard work. It's very rewarding, but it's hard, and it can be very grueling, but it doesn't have to be that way. And if you're really thinking about scaling your business right now, then I would go to scaletime.co/scalemap, SCALE map, MAP, because that's going to give you the first part of the scale framework. We've done this incredible job, giving people a heat map of their entire operations. And it's free. We made it completely free during the pandemic because we wanted to give value, like huge value to individuals. And you will get an entire visibility of what is working, and what is not, and what is sucking up your profitability, in one visual. And it's really awesome. So I would go ahead and do the scale map. If you do that, it signs you up for a newsletter as well, which basically gives you 3 months of small, actionable content to make you more profitable and have your business run without you.
Juliana, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thanks for tuning into the Cherish and Conquer podcast from Marina. Join our community of trailblazing women at community.marina.ai and get access to exclusive resources, checklists, and guides. If you found value in today's episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it across your social platforms. See you soon, and remember, barriers are for breaking.